Well, I was reminded this week that a few months back, in order to work on my ordination, which I tend to work on every once in a while, I'm still in that process, but I had to take a class, an online class, much like what we experienced here together Tuesday evening, about American Baptist missions. And it was a Friday evening and all day Saturday. And wouldn't you know, that Friday evening, I got sick. And so all Saturday, I was sick. And I was glad that that class was online, because I could just get on my computer and we didn't have our cameras turned on so no one could see me. So I just put that computer there and let them jabber on and on and on about American Baptist missions. And if I don't know about American Baptist missions yet, I'm never going to. So that aside, I just let them go, and I was just there laying in bed miserable, right? Did you ever have a situation like that, a condition like that? And it got me thinking about, hey, when you're sick, people can see it, right? They know it. So I was just so glad no one could see me laying there in my bed like that as I was in that class. But when we get sick most of the time, people know. They can see. Like if someone starts listening to you symptoms and they say, I think I might have Lyme's. What do we say? Well, did you have a bite? Did you see the bullseye pattern? Do you have the rash? You know, we can see that, right? We know that sickness is there because we can see that. Or if often people are battling cancer, you know, we see the effects of that on their body. Often they will lose their hair. When my little niece Gina was just a baby, she lost her hair from the chemo. My brother-in-law Pete Sapp, many of you know him. His brother Frank, many of you know him. His wife has been battling cancer. And so the chemo she's been taking, she lost her hair. And the thing about it is her family wanted to support her. So they had all the kids, you know, the girls and the boys, and Frank too, had all their heads shaved. They looked like me because they're supporting Bernetta, you know, their mother and or wife. Because we can see, right, we look at that. We see a woman in particular when she doesn't have hair. We guess, oh, she's sick. She's suffering from cancer. Because we can see it. And we can see it, so we have compassion. We wouldn't hesitate to say, oh, are you seeing a doctor? Oh, you need help. Let me help you. Let me go get that prescription filled for you. Because we can see the illness. But there are some illnesses we can't see. We don't see very well. The top of the list is mental illness. You don't see it. Depression being at the top of the list of mental illnesses or mental disorders in the United States right now. It's depression, and you don't see it, but it's a lot more prevalent than you might think. Let me give you some statistics about depression here today. 350 million people worldwide is estimated suffer from depression. That's 5% of the world's population. It gets even bigger in the United States. 1 in 10, that's 10%. In the United States, it's estimated, are affected by depression. That means 18.8 million people in the United States are affected by depressive disorders. And get this, the number of people diagnosed with depression or depressive disorders each year increases by 30% every year. That's incredible. And it is estimated that over 80% of those people who are suffering from depression aren't getting the treatment that they need. See, it's huge out there, and it means a lot of people around us, they're suffering from depression. And a recent study of millennials, I just read this a couple weeks ago, millennials who don't go to church very often. You know, they asked them, what topics do you want to hear or see? Would you be interested in the church addressing? You know what the number one thing is? Mental health. Because it's all around them. This idea of what's going on with mental health in our culture. Depression, it's all around them. Why aren't we talking about it in our churches? We're going to talk about it in our church today. Depression. Well, what do we mean by depression? According to the National Institute on Mental Health, depression is a common but serious mood disorder. It causes severe symptoms that affect how you feel, think, and handle your daily activities. So they gave that general definition, but then they give a list of symptoms. And they say if you have a number of these symptoms daily, they say for at least 2 weeks, so there's got to have some time there, you might be depressed. And listen to the list. Persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood. Feelings of hopelessness or pessimism, irritability. Some of us are just born that way, sorry. But Feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities, decreased energy or fatigue, moving or talking more slowly, feeling restless or having trouble sitting still, difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions, difficulty sleeping, early morning awakening or oversleeping, appetite or weight changes, thoughts of death or suicide attempts. All these symptoms that comprise this idea of what depression is. Now get this, I thought this was important, especially for the demographics in our congregation. Depression, especially in midlife or older adults, can occur with other serious medical illnesses such as diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and Parkinson's disease. And the conditions, those other medical conditions are often worsened when depression is involved. And the medications we often take for those other illnesses can cause or deepen our depression. So it's like a cycle. So this makes depression one of the most common mental disorders in the United States right now. People are suffering from this all around us, right? And you can't see it. But the fact that people are suffering from depression shouldn't surprise us as people of faith, because it seems when we read through our Bibles, there are a number of people there who we think, oh, maybe they were depressed. People look at it, scholars look at it and think maybe that's what was going on. When we talk about depression in the Bible, I always think of Jeremiah the prophet. Because you look at what's recorded about what happened to him and then the things he wrote, it seems like, oh, is he depressed? There's the book Jeremiah, which we attribute to Jeremiah, and then there's a second book we attribute to Jeremiah. Do you know what it is? Lamentations. Guess what that book's about? He's lamenting everything. And so people say, maybe Jeremiah was depressed. I think of King David. Well, we tend to think of David like, oh, he's the guy who slew Goliath, and he was like a great king. But there were a lot of things that happened in David's life. He was young. He served the king, King Saul, who turned around. And what was Saul's response to David? Tried to kill him. David's out on the run for his life. Got enemies all around him. Later, he's finally king, and he falls into sin. Because of his sin, his one baby boy ends up dying. Later on, his oldest son tries to depose him as king, forms a coup, kicks David out of the capital city. These are difficult things to have happen. And so I think, well, did David maybe get depressed from time to time? Fall into what we would call a clinical depression? Maybe. Let me read to you the first 3.5 verses from Psalm 69, which is attributed to David. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the miry depths where there is no foothold. I've come into the deep waters. The floods engulf me. I'm worn out calling for help. My throat is parched. My eyes fail looking for my God. Those who hate me without reason outnumber the hairs of my head. Many are my enemies without cause, those who seek to destroy me. Was David depressed? It seems like maybe he was. So we see people, godly people in the Bible even, seem like maybe they were suffering from depression, as are people all around us. The severe effects of depression, even within the church, came into the national spotlight just a couple of weeks ago, didn't it? When Pastor Andrew Stockland, suffering from depression and anxiety, took his own life, leaving behind a wife and 3 beautiful little kids. It's devastating. Let me read to you what one person wrote about being depressed. You find yourself isolated from the rest of the world, trying to figure out what's wrong with you. You begin to watch the world go by from your window instead of being in it yourself because you become too tired to fake it, and you can't handle one person asking, what's wrong? Constant moans of pain and sighs of exhaustion fill your mind and haunt your every step. They might even keep you up at night. Depression becomes your addiction, and you submit to an abusive relationship with it. You try to get away, but it keeps pulling you back until you just give yourself to it. I'm yours. Eventually, you really start to believe the world would be more beautiful without you. Words of depression, whether it's King David or the people around us sharing their experience. We see suffering from depression is very painful. And so often we don't see it. And so we can't offer compassion. So hopefully me talking about this today is making you feel like, oh, I need to respond. I need to have compassion on people who are suffering depression. Maybe it causes you to look around and be aware. You say, I want to help. But the question is, how do we help? How does an everyday, ordinary person reach out or help someone with depression? The answer to that question is love. Love them. I mean, God's answer is quite often love. But how do we love? Okay, that's just general. How do we love? Let me read to you 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. One of the most famous passages in the Bible about love. The Apostle Paul writes, Jim, will you put it up there for us, please? Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I found an article by Christian writer Lon Hetrick where he takes a look at this passage and he pulls out of it specific ways we can love people and help them when they are dealing with depression. He pulls out 6 things here, 6 truths. The first one being acknowledge it. Because he points out in verse 7 where it says, love believes all things. Listen, there are going to be times people might be coming to you and start talking about how they're down. They're not happy. They can't do anything. I think I'm depressed. And what do we sometimes say? Oh, you just need to get out more. You just need to do. Acknowledge it. Just say, oh, it sounds like maybe you've got depression. Or if they come to you and say, yeah, I'm depressed. Okay, don't argue with them. This is a real thing. Love believes all things. Believe them that they're dealing with something. Verse 5, it says, love is not arrogant or rude. So he says the second thing you can do is don't make people feel guilty if they're depressed. Don't say to them, well, if you would just do this or this, you wouldn't be so depressed. Or, well, I was going to do this with you, but you don't want to, so I guess, no, don't make them feel guilty. Because that's arrogant, that's rude. Love's not arrogant and rude. Verses 4 and 5, love is patient and it's not irritable. So one of the things you can do for a person suffering from depression is listen patiently. Hey, they might be in depression for a while. They might tell you about it every time you see them, to the point where you can say their lines to them before they say them. You've heard it so many times. Just listen patiently. That's one of the ways you can love them through it. Next one, keep living. In verse 7 it says, love hopes all things. Keep putting hope into their lives. You go on with your life. Keep inviting them to be part of your life. It might be difficult. They might say no. But keep hoping. Keep putting it out there. Keep going on with your life as they are dealing with what they are dealing. And keep inviting them into it. Number 5, pray together. It says, love bears all things. So when you know someone who's suffering from depression, pray for them. Pray with them. Bear that for them. Carry that, because sometimes when you're depressed, even that's too much effort. Prayer is too much effort. Prayer seems like, well, why would I? It doesn't do anything. When you're depressed, that's how you think. And the church will say, oh, I would never say that or think that, right? But a depressed person might. So bear that for them. Carry that for them in prayer. And finally, love endures all things, verse 7. Get used to it. It might be a while. Accept that and walk the road with them. Because people all around us are suffering from depression. Let's not be afraid to look around us and say, hey, who might it be? And to respond to them in love. And let's set our hearts on loving them rather than ignoring what they're going through. It's important that we as a community of faith respond like this when it's brought to our attention that people are suffering from depression, because if you look at the statistics that say 1 in 10 people in the United States is suffering from depression, well, even in a gathering this size, the odds are some of us are dealing with depression this very day. And if that's you, if you recognize yourself in that list of symptoms I gave earlier, you might have clinical depression. Let me be blunt. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you were depressed. Just like there's nothing wrong with admitting you've got the common cold. I mean, you've got an illness. It's something that needs to be addressed, like so many others. There's no shame in seeking medical attention, maybe even being prescribed medication to help you along your journey. Look, you would take medicine, and you'd go to if you got some flu or something, you go to a doctor and say, "Doc, give me something. Give me Z-Pack, Doc," whatever, right? And, so part of depression is your body gets into a chemical imbalance. Maybe something has happened that's caused your body to just react weirdly, something stressful or whatever, and you get this chemical imbalance in your body. Maybe it's just a natural way your body works. That chemical imbalance, most of the time, is not going to go away on its own. You might need medication to help deal with that, at least in the short term. See, most of the time, you can't just wish depression away by saying, I'm just going to try to be in a better mood. Often that chemical imbalance will not clear up on its own. You might need medication or some medical help. You're not a bad person if you're depressed, if you've attempted suicide or contemplated suicide. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you need help. In the church, we've got to be real about this, because there's this idea out there in the church that we always got to be happy because we're happy and joyful in the Lord. Nothing bad ever happens, and we never get these depression, these mind things. It's just like, no. Here they are. They're part of our world. Part of being in a fallen world. Part of being in a world where sin has corrupted things, even our bodies. We get physical illnesses and we get mental disorders like depression. There's nothing wrong with admitting you need help. And there is help. And there is hope. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, God is always our hope. As a follower of Jesus, the depressed person is never without hope because he or she always has God on their side. God is for you so much that he sent his son to this world to die for you. God loves you. He hasn't abandoned you. Now, when you're depressed, you might feel that he has. I'm talking about feelings. Feelings are very real things that we experience. Don't let anyone tell you you're feeling wrong, because your feelings are your own. You might feel like God has abandoned you or forgotten you. He doesn't love you. But while feelings are real, feelings are not facts. They're not always true. It's just how you feel. You may feel like God has abandoned you when you are depressed, but the fact is, he hasn't. He never does. Jim, show us, please. Let me tell you something that Jesus writes concerning this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. At the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is giving a bunch of things. He's saying, blessed. You'll be happy. You'll be joyful if these things are in your life. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He talks about the poor in spirit. You know who's included in the poor in spirit? Depressed people. And he promises you're going to find blessing because you're going to have the kingdom of heaven. A kingdom where you are loved. A kingdom where every tear will be wiped away. I'm talking about the poor in spirit, the poor. Let me take you back to Psalm 69. After David, we looked at some of the earlier verses in this earlier, and he just had that song, that psalm of lament, remember? We were saying David might be depressed here. He comes back and he talks about the poor, which would definitely include the poor in spirit Jesus was talking about, the depressed people. And he writes in verse 32, the poor will see and be glad. You will seek God. May your hearts live. The Lord hears the needy, and he does not despise his captive people. The promise to the poor in spirit, is that they will be glad. They might not feel glad right now, but God gives a promise that gives us hope that they will be glad. That's God putting hope into our lives. And when you seek God, your heart lives. That's what it says. Even though it may be telling you something different otherwise right now in your depression, your heart lives. God doesn't despise you, but he loves you and he offers you comfort. It says he hears the needy. God hears you. He hears your cries of anguish and pain, even when it's like inner pain that nobody else can see. I read these words and think about this, and it reminds me of a song we sing here. Always does. And I've used this song before because it's such a great set of words here. The song "Who You Are" by Christian Stanfill, we sing it. Put the words of the bridge up there, Jim. The whole song keeps saying, God, this is who you are, this is who you are. And then you get to this bridge. And it says, God, you hear the cry of every broken heart. You give the hopeless soul a brand new start. You lead the captive in your freedom song. This is who you are. And in the night when all our hope is lost, you're the one who won't give up on us. You hold the orphan in your loving arms. This is who you are. See, the song over and over again declares who God is. He is the one who hears the brokenhearted. He is the one who restores hope when it seems like it's all lost. He is the one who will never give up on us. Even when we've given up on ourselves, God doesn't give up on us. You know what this tells me? This tells me God is the one who heals us in our depression. That's who He is. He heals us. Now, He might do it by encouraging us just through the power of His Holy Spirit living in us. He might do it through medications and doctors that He has given us to address these imbalances in our body. He might do it by changing our circumstances. He might do it by a combination of those things. However He does it, God will make our depressed hearts alive again. When we're bold and brave enough to seek His healing through prayer, through medical treatments of the doctors He's provided for us, through the love and support of Christian brothers and sisters around us. You've got to tell them, you've got to let them know so they can support you. God promises the poor in spirit. He promises the depressed blessings in His kingdom. That's hope. God gives us that hope. That's hope for you today if you're one of the 10 in this country who suffer from depression among us. 3 years ago, when this church went through some very difficult things, and we don't need to get into all that, but I found myself in a deep spell of depression. Nothing seemed worthwhile. Nothing made it feel better. Nothing excited me. Nothing interested me. Nothing seemed to matter. That's depression. And sadly, it's not uncommon for pastors. But in that time, I had to go to my doctor and say, Doc, let's talk about some things. Is there medication? Is there other things I can do to maybe straighten out this imbalance that's happening because of the stress in my life? I had to ask Christian brothers and sisters to pray for me, to love me, be patient with me. And I had to trust God's promise of hope, even when it didn't feel real to me. And there were days, so many days, it didn't. But here's the thing, God is faithful and He prevailed. Nothing I did. God prevails, always. God is always faithful. I had to trust Him that He would, even when I didn't feel like it. Because it was all part of God's way of carrying me through, all part of God's way of healing me in my depression. When we talk about depression, people dealing with it all around us. Let's be that safe place where instead of avoiding the topic, we'll talk about it. Let's be that safe place where people who are suffering from depression can come and say, yeah, I am. And they're never going to find love here. Let's be that people puts love first, love people through depression, because we know love is God's way of taking care of the worst of things. It says love covers over a multitude of sins. It covers all the horrible stuff in this world. And let's be brave people ourselves, willing to embrace the steps God would have us take to experience His healing hope amidst our own depression, one day at a time. When you are depressed, remember who God is. He is the one who hears your inner cries. He is the one who sees your pain. He is the one who comforts you, and He's the one who brings you hope. That's hope amidst depression. Let us pray.